150 years of diamond mining in Kimberley. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I know our friends over in the States have just rolled out of bed, and I know some people are sitting in front of this with a cup of coffee. Good morning to you. I'm delighted that you have joined our GEMA webinar, Wednesday. It's becoming a bit of a tradition, and I hope this finds you all in the peak of good health. My name is Charles Evans, and I work for GEMA. My role is fairly broad-reaching. I am responsible for the IT and infrastructure here. I look after the laboratory, and I assist with many aspects of our general operations here. I have run a number of field trips and attended a number of conferences and events out with my official capacity. And I do this because I am passionate about GEMA and I am passionate about gemology. I've also taken a rather circuitous route into the industry, and this has given me some insights that I would hope could possibly complement what a classroom can teach you, and I'm hoping to share some of those with you today. Our talk today has these three aspects. We only have 45 minutes, and I'm hoping to finish up with a quick mention on the effect that the coronavirus has had on the industry and the surrounding mining operations. I'd also take this moment to thank a good friend of mine, Dr. Jock Roby, who lives out in Kimberley. He's been a working Kimberlite geologist, exploration geologist, diamond geologist, mining geologist, you name it, he's done it, and he's still doing it in the field of diamonds. He's offered me technical assistance, and he has shared a couple of slides with me, which are a special treat that we'll get to. Now, the aim of this talk is to equip you, regardless of your experience and your role, with some of the facts and insights that will empower you to speak about natural diamonds with confidence, and perhaps share some of my passion and understanding of this vital part of our industry, which is the exploration and the extraction. I will mention names, places, incidents, and events, all of which have fascinating backstories. And further research on your part will just help you get a little more context. So I would really encourage people, scribble down an interesting name or place or event that I mention and go and do some research. Do not stop at Wikipedia. Keep going. The Journal of Gemology, our publication at GEMA, is available online. It is indexed. You can look things up there. I will put in a mention of our competition, GIA. GIA are also very generous with the research they do, and additionally, they're 100 times our size. They actually employ some fantastic researchers in the fields of diamond science. Really worth reading up about. So that's enough of that. Let's get stuck in. Right, this is a quick orientation. Where is Kimberley? It is smack bang in the middle of South Africa, as you can see. That star on the map there near the junction where the Vaal River joins the Orange River and flows out to sea. You can see there it forms the border between Namibia and South Africa. Cape Town down at the bottom, just to give you an idea of the perspective of some of this. Johannesburg further north, that those gold fields were discovered as a result and after the successes of Kimberley. That's very significant. And going on around clockwise, we have Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. And then, of course, the mountain kingdom of Lesotho in the middle there. Moving swiftly on, why was Kimberley important? A number of factors. Firstly, it changed mining through consolidation. And this is critical, this is key, this affected mining everywhere in the world, because what they were learning here applied everywhere else. It just took longer. It changed the market through availability. When suddenly you're producing 90% of the world's diamonds, and there has been a hole that Brazil and India have no longer been able to fill. You're changing the game. And it changed South Africa. It opened up the interior, and it led to the discovery of the gold fields. It led people on into Botswana and Zimbabwe. Another story entirely. Botswana's mines are 100 years younger, incidentally. That's a subject for another one of these talks. 7 years on, as I say, Kimberley was providing 90%, 7 years on from those first discoveries, 90% of the world's diamonds. It is the type locality for kimberlite, and this is really, really important, because this is where the science started, and this is where we learned that diamonds were not just in alluvial gravels. Alluvial means they were carried, generally eroded sediments that have been carried somewhere by the flow, generally the flow of water, for those who are not up with some of these terms. Critically, there are heaps of kimberlites around Kimberley. 15 of them within a 10-kilometer radius were diamondiferous, and 4 of those at one point produced more than half of the world's supply of diamonds per year, which is quite incredible. And those 4, even more significant, those 4 are still producing, albeit a couple of them through the reclamation of old dumps. But this is what's exciting about what's going on in Kimberley. This amazing little town remains a big player, and now they're tidying up some of the old dumps, because they're recycling them, and they're putting the material back into some of the holes. And this is where the really interesting carbon capture technology comes into things. So what is kimberlite? Well, in brief, it is a dark, dense, igneous rock, quite often broken up, and it may contain diamonds, and that's why we're interested in it. It comes up from the mantle, and it contains many minerals and rocks or rock particles that have come up from the mantle with it. It has an incredible story to tell, but it's really difficult to interpret. This is why it's such a specialization, because of the high energy interactions that have occurred on its journey, which could have been anything from 100 odd kilometers, 60 miles, to 2 or 3 times that from the mantle up to the surface. And of course, it's the host rock that no other mining region had yet identified as being what contained diamonds. Olivine is a major constituent of it, and a couple of other things are really important. It contains mantle xenoliths or xenocrysts, depending on their size. Xeno meaning foreign, and lith meaning rock, crystal. So these are essentially foreign bodies that it captured on its journey up, and it's brought to the surface with it. And these teach us a lot, and some of them can be diamondiferous. These xenocrysts, because it's the little bits, are more common than diamond, and they are most helpful to exploration geologists, because as they have disintegrated and been released and entered the alluvial systems, they are what we search for when we're looking for the source of diamonds. Now, of course, what is also in kimberlite, what we really hope for, is that they're diamonds. But there are certain very specific conditions, temperature and pressure conditions required, and they have to survive the trip. That is a brutal trip that a kimberlite makes from the mantle, and it is quite possible that these things could just be burned to bits or shattered beyond any commercial usefulness. There are the temperature and pressure requirements. They're fairly straightforward. They generally happen. What is key is that they generally occur at depths of 140 to 180 kilometers. Super deep diamonds, there's some great research being done into them now, are believed to have possibly come from as far down as 660 kilometers. And then there's an interesting bit. Diamondiferous kimberlites start under a craton. What is a craton? This we'll talk about shortly. But this little thing was Clifford's rule, and Clifford was a well-known geologist in the 60s, and this little rule of thumb, is there a craton underneath it, has been amended a few times, but it still stands, and it's in a lot of the literature. Finally, they take different forms. We are used to seeing them as the carrot shape, the diatreme, but equally they can appear as sills and as dikes, so flat surfaces or walls, if you like, depending how the surrounding rock, the native rock bed has perhaps steered them in their journey. As we can see from this illustration here, it mentions successive eruptions, and this is always the case. Every kimberlite that they look at has what they call different phases, and some of these can be more diamondiferous, some of them can be a waste of time, but they're all it always happens. Let us take a quick look here at some fine concentrate. Now, this is me outside the back door of a final sorting plant, on my knees trying to take a photo in the sunlight. You can see the bleached out ruler there, but more interesting, you can spot the garnets, you can see the chrome diopside, you can possibly pick out some ilmenite. These are the minerals that are far more common than diamond, and they're entrained in that kimberlite on its journey to the surface, and they're what people are looking out for when they're sampling the ground or sampling sediments. I have here a picture by the late Professor John Gurney. He very sadly passed away in November last year from the University of Cape Town. And write this down, messengers from the mantle. If you ever get to Cape Town and you can get into the university and see the mantle collection that he built up, it's incredible. It's fabulous to see, and it teaches you so much. But here are some spectacular examples of minerals that have been brought up from the mantle. You can spot a diamond in there. There are numerous garnets. There's probably a zircon or two. Ilmenites, those are the black shiny stones. They're a titanium iron oxide. They're all part of it. And now I'm going to talk about two specific types of mantle rock that Hello, can you hear me now? Oh, thank goodness. We had this issue yesterday and it actually went out for more than an hour. I'm so sorry about that. We'll continue. Okay. I hope you didn't miss too much there. All I was doing was gushing over this peridotite sample, which you can see the scale of it with my loop there. Spot the gorgeous purple garnets in it. And this is an example of what's come up all the way from the mantle. It is a fabulous resource for researchers, and some of them in particular, eclogites, which are the second type. Eclogites are quite likely to have diamonds. Interestingly, in the old days, these got tossed aside. The diggers wasted no time on these, and that's why Kimberley has some fabulous examples of them. And they were tossed aside because they were really tough. Kimberlite weathered, these things didn't. And they didn't have the mechanical means of crushing them. So they lie all around the old dumps in Kimberley, and it's really exciting to pick up a good example of one of those. So we're going to talk about how kimberlite was formed, and the first thing that Clifford told us in 1966 is that we needed a craton, and we've got a fabulous craton sitting underneath southern Africa there. It is called the Kaap-Vaal craton. Kaap spelt the Afrikaans way, K-A-A-P, meaning the Cape, and Vaal as in the river. you can see exactly where all the super important mines are present, and you can see every single one of them sits on top of the Karpval Craton. You can also see there the river system that has transported diamonds for millions of years now down to the coastal region of Oranje-Mund. Oranje-Mund means orange mouth, and then they get washed because that Atlantic current is generally heading northwards, so they're generally pushed, or as you'll learn if you learn a little bit about the Namdeb deposits on the beach there, they actually get blown up the beach as well. So we've got our Karpval Craton. Let's move on, and this is where I have a treat for you. I'm going to introduce you all to a fabulous artist by the name of Maggie Newman. And Maggie is a paleo artist, a geo artist, and she specializes in accurately recreating scenes that occurred before human eyes were there to see them. And she was commissioned by De Beers and assisted by Jock Roby in painting this little series to help illustrate the story of Kimberlite. And I have no idea where those paintings sit now. De Beers should be lauded for producing them, but we're going to use them for educational purposes today. The first thing we're going to observe here is we see a cross section, and we need to visualize the 7 major plates that the Earth's crust is divided into. These are called tectonic plates. These plates are constantly moving towards each other, away from each other, alongside each other at a rate of 1 to 10 centimeters a year. And this movement is caused by the convection flows below. These volatile liquid regions of the mantle, which in particular, the oceanic crust is very much thinner than the land over the landmass, and there is far more movement in these oceanic plates. And you can see there, she's illustrated it fabulously. You can imagine that violent swirling, that upswell in yellow and orange and red there, pushing up, forcing out volcanoes, because this is where we get volcanic activity. This is where mountains are created. This is how undersea trenches change and appear and disappear. And importantly to us, this is where subduction occurs. And of course, the little rumblings that come off these movements are the cause of earthquakes and tsunamis. So in brief, new crust is constantly being formed as a volcano punches its way out in the middle, and it's pushing things down to the side. New crust is constantly being formed. Old crust is constantly being destroyed. It's part of our cycle. And if we were to visualize the right-hand side of this picture, and we scoot to this close-up, and let us imagine for a moment that on the left-hand side there we have the Cape region, and this is the Atlantic oceanic slab being subducted here. It is being forced underneath the bulkier, the heavier continental landmass of Southern Africa, and it is taking down into that interior and all sorts of things like carbonates, carbon, vital for the production of diamonds. It is taking these things down to where they're being melted and essentially recycled. And they're going into what is called the asthenosphere, the lower mantle. Now, we're interested really in we simplify this down to 2 regions: the lithosphere, which is the upper mantle, the asthenosphere, which is the lower mantle. The top bit is solid, the bottom bit is volatile, it is liquid. The top bit, named here the cold lithosphere, that is probably something you wouldn't want to take too literally, but what it does mean is it is stable. The conditions are stable there, and it is stable conditions, stable temperature and pressure conditions that diamonds require in order to grow, in order to stay, in order to survive. And then all we're waiting for is for one of these kimberlites to punch up from beneath, pick them up along the way, along with all of these exciting xenoliths and xenocrysts, and take them up to the surface where one day we hope to find them. Kimberlite, the youngest kimberlite is around 40 million years old. So none of this has happened for a very long time, but we're going to look at two that did occur a long time ago. And this is Maggie's reconstruction of what happened at Kimberley. Two pipes right next to each other about 900 million years ago exploded. If you look at that illustration there, the second dark line, the lower one, is probably the current level of present day Kimberley, the level of the earth, the ground around Kimberley currently. So this gives you an idea of just how much material has eroded away, that has entered that river system and washed down to sea. And it suggests that Namibia probably has a lot more diamonds to find yet. Now, moving swiftly on, with that picture in mind, let's take a look at this Petra image. Petra owns these two mines, which are still operating, Dutoitspan and Bultfontein. And these two, they were never worked particularly deep, certainly by modern, well, even by Kimberley standards. They weren't worked very deep before they went underground. And you can see joint shaft is the shaft that serves both of them. And it's a wonderful operation there. That in the background, that body of water, take note of it now because you'll see it in another image later on, and it'll help give you some perspective. And in the meantime, that little space of lawn that you see dead center, that's joint shaft today. A neat, tidy, and wonderfully friendly and efficient operation. Let's do some history now. Right, now history caps on, and we are looking at an old map that is probably pushing 140, 150 years in age. At this time, the Cape Colony and Natal up to the side, out of view, belonged to the British. They were British colonies. The Orange Free State, which you can see outlined in yellow, and the Transvaal, which is next door to it to the north, were Boer republics. And Kimberley, as you can see there, sat kind of oddly on its own in Griqualand West. And the Griquas were people who moved out from the Cape region and settled there. And indeed, they ran their own affairs for a time. The other thing I'd point out to you is most of the diggers, and within a couple of years of the discovery of those first important diamonds, 40,000 of them had walked in either from Cape Town, and that's 1,100 kilometers, 650 odd miles, or from Port Elizabeth, and I think that was 800, yeah, 1,100 from Cape Town, 800 from PE, as the locals call it. And I think there were 24 rivers to cross, major rivers to cross on the way. It was not an easy journey at all. There was no infrastructure. So the early days of Kimberley, what kicked it all off? Well, two diamond discoveries in particular. The Eureka diamond, which a shepherd found. He actually did quite well out of it. He at least received some compensation by somebody who guessed that it was a diamond and basically gave them everything he had, or everything they had, to get it off them. And the second one, the Star of South Africa, was found by it was a plaything of a few kids, and a person visiting the farm where these kids were playing with it offered to buy it off them, and the mother said, "Oh no, just take it," and they got absolutely nothing for the thing. Now, with Kimberley itself, the big hole of Kimberley that you'll have heard of, actually started off on the farm owned by two brothers, the De Beers brothers, and that's a very familiar name to us in diamond mining nowadays. And they owned a farm called Vooruitzicht, and it was quickly named the Diggers Camp because they took it over. The Diggers Camp was quickly known as New Rush. And finally, when Kimberley became a British electoral district, it was renamed Kimberley because the Secretary of State for the colonies then was Lord Kimberley, and someone deemed it appropriate. Now, by the time it was named Kimberley, it had quite a considerable population, and its role in supplying the world's diamond was not insignificant. What we need to remember was the people who made this journey to the interior were real pioneers. South Africa had no appeal. It was an economic backwater. Britain had previously had no interest in the interior, and in fairness, there was nothing to attract interest. There was no wealth, there were no millionaires. It was just a disparate collection of frontier farmers, hunters, traders, trying to eke out a living. The indigenous population was very sparse because it is quite a hostile region. Most of it is semi-desert. Another important factor in Kimberley's early days was its role in the Boer War. Particularly the Second Boer War, or the Second Boer War it wasn't around in the First Boer War. The siege of Kimberley, at the time, Cecil Rhodes, who was such a big player in the town itself, was living on his estate on the outskirts of Cape Town, and rumor had it the war was going to break out, and he was so keen he felt so personally responsible for the people of Kimberley. He knew the siege was probably going to happen, and he actually went back to Kimberley. And under his direction, an amazing talent, a man by the name of George Labram, who was an American engineer. Do read about him if you can. This brilliant chap brought a number of things to Kimberley that really helped it stay at the forefront of all the towns in the world at the time. I mean, Kimberley was this. Kimberley is different sources say different things. The second town in the world to be electrified, or the fourth town. Take which one you will. It was at the cutting edge of stuff. It was the Silicon Valley of its day. George Labram brought refrigeration. He brought pumps. And Long Cecil is another fascinating story because when they were besieged, they were completely outgunned. They had no defense against the Boers who sat on the hills, pounding away with the long toms. And in 19 days in the mine workshop, he knocked out an artillery piece that could respond to them. And sadly, he died in a Boer bombardment. If you ever visit Kimberley, do take the time. You have to take the time to look at this wonderful museum. It's called the Big Hole Museum. I think it was largely De Beers' input and money and the local town that have put this together using a lot of original fixtures and fittings. Indeed, some of the buildings are completely original. They simply dismantled them and reassembled them at this location. That tram was decommissioned in 1947. They got it working again in 2012 just to run backwards and forwards a little. But they had a tram system for 60 years, retiring it in 1947. It's an amazing town. It really is incredible. And this recreation is fabulous. It really makes you feel the place. For those of you who are wondering, those two things on the floor, they're spittoons. They're not dog's balls. And look at those prices. I mean, French brandy, a case of it for R5.50. I think the exchange rate right now is about 20 Rand to a pound. It's not doing too well at this moment. So here we are. This is the view from the museum itself down into that big hole of Kimberley. And this is what you can see today. It hasn't changed an awful lot, as you will see later, if you keep this image in mind. Let's run through a couple of details about it. And here's Jock. It produced 14.5 million carats of diamonds. So that is in those weight measures, that is 2,700 kilograms of diamonds, and it was shut by 1914. So from 1871 to 1914, 14.5 million carats of diamonds. Just incredible, quite incredible. 22.5 million tons of dirt were excavated, and they went by hand down to 240 meters. And that was incredible. And they only achieved that because Cecil Rhodes consolidated the mine into De Beers Consolidated. And here you can see why consolidation was so important. Mine claims in those days were 31 feet by 31 feet. So if you had a mine claim in the middle of that lot there, and the guy next door to you took a few weeks off, a really, really hazardous situation would unfold. And as you can see there in the middle, some of those stacks towering over the guys underneath, that was never going to end very well. And there were lots of squabbles. There were horrific accidents, and the pathway to success was through consolidation. So initially, it was just a bun fight between you and your neighbor as to who could find enough to buy the other guy out. And very quickly, a few large companies emerged in the middle of that, and right at the top of it, two guys emerged, Cecil John Rhodes and Barney Bonato. Barney Bonato had headed out to Kimberley to make his fortune in his early 20s. He might actually have been 20. And Cecil Rhodes had headed out there with his brother at the age of 17. And they both had a brilliant mind for this business. They just saw exactly what had to happen. De Beers Consolidated was created, and the rest is history, as they say. Now, before we move too far away from our geology, let me just introduce one little concept that I skipped for you, and that is the idea of yellow ground and blue ground. Yellow ground, kimberlite that has been exposed to regular weather, tends to go a little yellow, and it becomes friable, and it is very easy to handle. It is easy to dig. It is easy to crush. And when these guys started working away at the top of those kimberlites, it was very easy to begin with. And as they got through the weathered kimberlite, they hit something called blue ground. And at first they thought that was the end of it, but they quickly realized that the blue ground weathered itself fairly quickly. So mining operations continued. They just had to use dynamite now, and they blasted the stuff out and had to lay it out to let it weather. And it would take a matter of 6 months or so before it was soft enough to send a gang of men with hammers out to start crushing it down. And there you see, remember I said to you, take note of the size of that body of water? Well, there you can see the bun in the middle towards the bottom there, the pan, that is Du Toit's pan. And if you visualize that drone photograph, imagine that was taken from above Beaconsfield, looking down towards the pan, and then you can see just how large those aprons of blue ground spread out. They spread out over miles and were just left there until they were able to be crushed, because there were no mechanical means. It took a very long time for one of these to reach Kimberley, and when it did, the amount of power that you could generate with steam just was not good enough to operate crushers. They didn't have the means, and this thing ended up just trundling backwards and forwards over those rows of weathering blue ground. And this guy didn't have the sun in his eyes. Look at that. That is looking back towards where I took the old photograph, and that is a mere 10 years before they ceased underground operations. That underground mine, I don't know if I mentioned it, went down to 1,100 meters, and it was done by 1914. Quite an achievement, because most modern mines don't bother going much further past that. So more than 100, nearly 106 years ago, they'd comfortably reached that level and chose to call it a day. Mining, right? Let's go and see some contemporary mining. I have to start by saying a very big thank you to a number of people. I was incredibly fortunate to be able to go along to these mines, and the staff, all of them were Petra mines at the time, and still are. The Petra staff were fantastic, and it is such an intimidating environment to enter, particularly if you haven't been in a mine before. And these guys do such a thorough orientation, the safety briefing. You're issued every single bit of kit. You're never more than arm's length away from a staff member. They really went above and beyond to ensure that I got to see absolutely everything there was to see in these mines, and it was fabulous. And likewise, we're going to meet a couple of the mining juniors. We'll head out to Careerflay, which is run by Blue Rock Diamonds. They were in the news recently. And then finally, we're going to finish up looking at a project by Ekapa Mining at Superstone. I believe Petra have an interest in it now as well. The Hearn brothers are the brainchild behind it. And that's where we'll finish up the mining segment. So there's Finch. It's a little way outside Kimberley, to be perfectly honest, but I got some fabulous photographs there, and they illustrate best what you could see in any one of the other mines. It's South Africa's second most productive after Venetia. Venetia is De Beers' only mining asset left in South Africa, which in many ways is quite sad, because their history is there. But not to fear, they still look after the museum. They maintain a game reserve on behalf of the Kimberley community just on the outskirts. It used to be Cecil Rhodes' old game reserve. It's now accessible to everybody, and this is an exciting mine to see. So let's go to Finch. Now, the first thing I want to teach you about, or tell you about, or let you get into your heads, is this idea of, and oh my goodness, the miners hate it when you draw this analogy, but that is underground mining of a kimberlite by eating the carrot out from underground. But this really is what happens when you go underground, when you've exhausted your attempts from the surface. It's starting to get too expensive to go wider, so you can go deeper, and you sink the money to going underground. There you can see the shafts pop out. They just came in from underground and they pulled that kimberlite out. And this is an interesting example of it, because this is 600 meters down and there's daylight. It's just incredible to see. And where we're standing right here, there's something particularly exciting. This is the contact zone. And this is something geologists get very excited about, because here we can see exactly the border between the kimberlite intrusion and the native rock, the black basalt there that had burst up through. And in this instance, it's done it so with surgical precision. Initially, I told you that kimberlite was quite often quite a broken rock, and if you look at that, you can see what I mean by that. It actually looks like it is a kind of concrete. It's like cement with a mixture of gravels in it, but that's kimberlite, and that's got diamonds. A word on safety, just to give you an idea on safety in these mines, because it's something you struggle to get your head around, and it's quite frightening when you think of the equipment that runs around in a mine. But the steps they take are amazing, and they're in safety is such a key thing. It is drilled into you at every point, and when you take a minute to read the accident reports, quite honestly, more will happen on a school playground in the average break time than will happen in 6 months on a modern mine, because these guys know their stuff and they are absolutely on it, and they have to be. The consequences of accidents are too great, and we'll see that in a second. But just while we look at these guys here, what do we see? The aluminium packs on the backs, on everyone's belt there. That is an oxygen hood that will supply you with 20 minutes of oxygen if a fire or a gas release were to occur. Not really a problem in diamond mining, but you have that nonetheless. It's coal mining where noxious gases and fire risks are great, but they take no chances. You've got one of those. Everyone's got one of those. Proximity alerts. This is one of the big game changers in modern mines, has been the introduction of these things that are connected to every person and every piece of moving equipment. Because if that, you can see that big front end loader approaching us there. The guy in the cab will have had lights flash and buzzers go off, warning him that there are people, and there's a little pictogram there so he knows whether they're on the left or the right or the ahead. In this case, we're both sides. And equally, we have a flashing light on our back so he can see us if we're not facing him. And we have a lens on the hood of our cap that flashes in our eyes to let us know there's a vehicle passing. And if we get too close, the engine will cut and the machine will grind to a halt. And there'll be some explaining to do for why that was allowed to happen. And this gives you an idea why they have to be so careful. That shovel there contains 7 tons of kimberlite. And can you see where the driver is? I can't either. Not safe at all. And this is why they're super careful with these things. What do we have here? Well, here we're at the face, at the mining face, at the end of a shaft, and we're looking at the markings where they are going to drill and place the explosives for the next blast. Blasting in many mines, most mines, will probably happen at the end of a shift when the level and the mine is empty, and it will be visited by safety engineers after the blast and the dust is settled, and they'll declare it okay or otherwise. What happens if things go woefully wrong? Every level has refuges. This one's made for 30 people, and the guys actually come here for a sandwich and a tea break. But this gives you an idea of how secure it is. That is solid rock above you. There's nothing going to collapse. And this is where you gather. Roll call is taken. There's medical equipment. There are secondary power supplies. There are redundant means of communication with the surface. There's food. There's water, etc., etc. Backup and fresh air. Something we haven't talked about is drilling. Every mining operation is reliant on drilling, and there are a number of different techniques. I've been a driller myself. Some are easier than others. And here we see trays of core samples. These have been recovered by a method called diamond drilling, which is a little misleading, but it basically means with these, a diamond drill bit is essentially cutting an outline, and the core is going up the middle of the pipe to be recovered every 6 or 9 meters, and it gets laid out in trays like this for the geologists to examine. They're logging exactly what they see for every given meter, and from that they build up the 3D views that allow the mining company to make economic decisions on where they go next and what chances they have of finding good material. Interestingly, in that third tray along, you can see how it starts. Even the second tray, you can see how the core sample has started to deteriorate. It is always a painful subject for the geologists who look at these things and just see how millions and millions of dollars worth of exploration just sits crumbling as it weathers. That was so much hard work. Oh my goodness, do I know that? And here's a picture of a core sample from Kimberlite. Now this is an example that I really liked because it's got a fabulous color that suggests there could be a bit of chromium in there. There are blotches. The blotches are the xenocrysts that we discussed. We can see there's been significant alteration between them at the contact zone between them and the host kimberlite. Really interesting. They've been rounded off like pebbles, and there's a story to be told by those rocks in there. And that, incidentally, is what when they're in the later stages of exploration, they just pop that whole thing into acid, and everything dissolves away except the diamonds, and they filter that through and they look for micro diamonds, and it's those micro diamonds that start to give them a picture of the possible bounty of the kimberlite that you're looking at. Here's another photograph just with the meter marker. You can get some scale there. You can see from the Saskatchewan Geological Survey, who I had along with me there. Now we'll visit a mining junior, and mining juniors are key players, and they're all too often forgotten. What is a mining junior? Well, open the newspaper, open to the financial pages and read about some of those little guys there, the names you don't recognize. And those are quite possibly mining juniors. They're people who've maybe gone out like Blue Rock have, and they've purchased the rights to something that De Beers first found. For whatever reason, De Beers chose not to develop this mine. It has fabulous potential, and Blue Rock have decided they'd get together investors and they get stuck in because they really believe that there is something worthwhile there. And it's a great little project. It's really exciting to see a new generation of mining starting out. And if they choose to become big and go underground, who knows? They may not. They may just choose to prove how big the reserves are, and they'll let one of the bigger players buy them out, and they'll go and look somewhere else, or they may keep working on this. The mining juniors, it's an exciting, it's quite a risky business. They're making big gambles and they're working extremely hard. So let's have a look at Careerflay. They were in the news recently because they've struck a deal to sell their diamonds through a different channel, and that's all part of perhaps I may be speculating a bit here, but the idea that you want people to ask for your product because they know where it's come from, and they know that your methods and your techniques are conform to what they expect of you. Here's Careerflay. They've got to scratch off 1.5 meters of topsoil, which is relatively recent, 7 meters of calcrete, which is not something that occurs everywhere in the world. It's generally an arid region rock. And these guys are looking to hit pay dirt in 100 meters because they need to pay back the kit and they need to reinsure their investors. And these guys are hard at work on it. And this gives you an idea of some of the costs involved. It is not cheap. These puppies have to run 24 hours a day to help the place earn its living. Okay, indulge me. Having worked in the drilling industry, I looked at these things. That's the first time I'd ever seen what bower rigs can sample, and I was amazed. If you can visualize something that can core up to 600 meters deep and bring these things up, that is incredible. But the interesting thing is this is the point where the mining company starts talking in its literature about bulk sampling, because that is a bulky sample, and you are not just going to melt that down with acid and look for the microdiamonds. When you've got 600 meters of that, you are putting it through a regular recovery plant, and you are fully expecting to find a couple of stones at the end of it that give you a really good indication. You're only investing that level of money if you're pretty sure that it's got things. So De Beers had done that. They knew what they had. Blue Rock had probably looked at those results and they knew they were good, and it was worth a punt for those juniors. And here is their lovely little recovery plant. There you can see the settlement tanks, blue rimmed. You can see the grizzlies start on the left-hand side there, where the trucks dump the material in. And that is put together in a matter of months. And equally, it could be dismantled and moved somewhere else. It could be sold. That is part of their assets. It is surrounded by berms, so it is not an eyesore on the horizon. They do not have issues with dust offending neighbors. Actually, this place is in the middle of nowhere, but they're doing everything very correctly. And it was a nice project to visit. Now, I haven't got any slides here on the final recovery. There are two methods that I have seen very closely in Kimberley. They quite like their grease tables, and if you want to read more about grease tables, there is actually a small diamond company in South Africa that have put together a web page, and it's called something like greasetables.co.za or something like that. It's very easy to find on Google. Read about how they operate. It's almost a to-do guide or how-to guide that they've written there. Really interesting. These guys, the juniors, generally use it's Russian-made equipment generally. I can't remember the brand name right now, but this is where your final concentrate tumbles down a chute. It has fluorescent lights shone on it, and whenever a diamond shows up, a little flap bats it off into the can, and they're generally very, very good. But nonetheless, as a mining junior, you can't afford any mistakes. So the three of us spent 15 minutes with these three trays, and within these 15 minutes, we found that rather pathetic little collection that you see down on the bottom right. Not very many diamonds, and certainly not worth an awful lot. That's the very smallest size scoop, for those of you who are familiar with that scoop. And I, quite frankly, found that little handful of garnets that I picked out to be far more interesting. So last but not least, we saved the best to last. This is Ekapa, Kimberley Ekapa Mining and Superstone, a joint venture. I believe Petra is part of this as well now. What they are doing, what they have done, is set up a recovery plant. Initially, it was absolutely recycled bits and pieces. It was a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of a recovery plant, because it was made up from pieces from everywhere, and they were just working their way through. Initially, when they started, De Beers still owned these old mine dumps. They now own them. They've bought De Beers out, and they were just working through these old mine dumps, reprocessing and recovering diamonds that had been missed by the diggers back in the old days. So you know, of course, that some of these mine dumps are now 150 years old. It is inevitable that our recovery methods nowadays are a little more efficient than they were back then. What do they do with what is left over from the process? Well, you fill in the holes. And this is where Kimberley can be a shining example of just how responsible diamond mining can be. You dig a hole and you take out the dirt and you pick through it for the diamonds you want, and you're left with a pile of dirt and a hole. And if you deal with both of those correctly, you're doing a very good job. And this is what they're striving to do here. That there was an open pit mine. It took them from 1994 to fill that. It has been overfilled by 15 meters because there will be some settlement. And what will happen is it will become a green area. It will be a community green space. And you can see Kimberley there in the background. And that really is a wonderful thing. Now, as some of you may have seen in recent days, I was quite surprised it popped up on my social media feed. De Beers are talking about the program that they're doing involving kimberlite, processed kimberlite, and its potential to absorb CO2. I think what they're working on is finding a way to get it to absorb CO2 faster, because it is what kimberlite does when it weathers. It absorbs CO2, and if you let it absorb CO2 and then you fill in one of the holes that you've created, you're essentially taking a lot of CO2 away, and your operation is becoming certainly carbon neutral and quite possibly even doing good for the environment. So this is the exciting state of play today, and it's an industry that we can feel proud of the work they're doing, and all of the people involved there. But what is the current situation? Well, as you all know, the impact of coronavirus has been dreadful. It's affected every single one of us. And I think in our day-to-day lives, certainly in mine, it's very visible. I can see the retail shops are all shut. I can only imagine what it is for those shop owners. But in developed countries, there's a very good chance that people have good government support. Certainly in the UK, they've been doing as much as they can for everybody. And I wouldn't want to trivialize anybody's situation, but do spare a thought for our miners, particularly the guys here in Kimberley. Mines often have a far more precarious, high-stakes economic model. And what you quickly learn when you visit these mines is they have a heightened sense of responsibility towards one another. It's a wonderful thing to feel when you're there, but this heightened sense of responsibility comes from the fact that the mine knows that it isn't merely part of the community. Very often it is the community. So when it's in difficulty, it is not merely one commercial entity among many. It is a reflection of that whole community that is in difficulty. And of course, you know, as you can read there, when South Africa went to level 5 lockdown, which basically meant nobody could do anything, no one could move, you couldn't even buy cigarettes and alcohol. That was tough on the mines, because let's face it, when you shut down a mining operation, you do not just flip the light switch, set the alarm, and lock the door after you. Nature is unstoppable. Seepage will come out the walls, pumps need to be operating. If you start to lose ground, you may never win it back, because once a previously dry level becomes sodden, it is maybe never safe to work again. So this is a dreadful situation for all of these mines. It's really tough. As of Monday, the lockdown level moved to 3, which means level 3, 50% of people are allowed to go back into certain industries, not all of them, certain industries. Mining is one of them, and this is probably just enough for them to start ensuring the safe conditions of the place. It's going to take a very long time for them to come back online. Their health and safety measures, the screening, the testing, all of these things they have to do will be done at their cost. They get no assistance for any of it. And in many ways, it actually makes them more efficient. A commercial entity is always going to be more efficient at these things than a government entity. So what did we learn today? Right, let's wrap up on the geology of kimberlites. I hope you all managed to get that Kimberley is the type locality for kimberlite. They're a form of volcanic rock. They are not the source of diamonds. They merely transport them from the upper mantle region for us. The diamonds they can contain can be billions of years older than the kimberlite that bore them to the surface. Certainly in the case of Kimberley, actually, they think some of their diamonds could be 3.2 billion years old, while as we saw with those two kimberlites, they're a mere 90 million years old. Two important types of mantle rock, eclogites and periddotites. And not only are they of commercial interest to mining companies, but they can tell us an awful lot about the inner workings of our Earth. And we ran through the very specific heat and pressure conditions required in that diamond stability zone for diamonds to grow and exist in the first place. On the history, we learned how it's all started out with the Eureka diamond, followed by the Star of South Africa, how quickly the population grew, characters like George Labram, also think Winston Churchill was there as a war correspondent during the Boer War. Rudyard Kipling was a good friend of Cecil Rhodes. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. He was an army surgeon in South Africa during the Boer War. And it was this opening up of Kimberley that brought wealth to South Africa, because when the miners moved out from Kimberley to see if there was more to be found, they headed up the Vaal River, and what did they find up at the top? That was where, if you recall that map, Johannesburg is sitting, and that is the Witwatersrand gold fields that they discovered there. We learned about De Beers Consolidated, how that was all formed, and that was a lot of history for you to go over and read if you choose to do so. Finally, the mining. What did we cover there? Eating the carrot out from below, the contact zone, safety, core samples, the mining juniors, bower rigs, and today the reclamation and processing of old mine dumps, and the filling in of some of these big excavations, and then the exciting potential future that the diamond industry has with the carbon capture potential of kimberlite. A couple of images here that just give you an idea of the guys underground, and I'm going to give you a quick word on something special for next week, because we have to I did promise you I'd tell you about next week, and I hope you will sign up because the fabulous Julia Griffith is back with a talk on man-made gemstones explained, and she's going to talk about how synthetics are manufactured, how to identify them, and she's going to walk through probably the big four, but she'll certainly mention the others. So think ruby and sapphire, emerald, diamond, and do sign up as soon as the news of that is released. We look forward to having you, and I hope you enjoyed today. Thanks ever so much. Okay, goodbye.